In 1972, a 28-year-old college dropout named Nolan Bushnell changed the world with a simple command: avoid missing ball for high score. Those words appeared on the screen of Pong, the first commercially successful video game, marking the birth of an industry that would eventually generate more revenue than Hollywood. Bushnell's company, Atari, derived its name from the Japanese game Go, where Atari means a stone or group of stones is in imminent danger of capture. The irony would prove prophetic. The company that created the video game empire would eventually find itself in Atari, surrounded by enemies of its own making, with no escape route in sight. Pong was deceptively simple: 2 paddles, 1 ball, endless possibilities. But behind that simplicity lay revolutionary technology and shrewd business instincts. Bushnell and his co-founder, Ted Dabney, built their prototype for just $500, testing it at a local bar called Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California. Within days, the machine had broken down. Not from malfunction, but because it was literally overflowing with quarters. Bar patrons couldn't stop playing. Atari began manufacturing Pong machines in an abandoned roller skating rink, selling them for $1,200 each while producing them for approximately $300. By 1973, the company was shipping tens of thousands of units annually, essentially creating the arcade industry from nothing. The success attracted major competitors like Midway and Williams, but Atari maintained its edge through constant innovation and an understanding that video games weren't just products, they were experiences. The home console market beckoned next, and Atari answered with the Video Computer System in 1977, later renamed the Atari 2600. This wasn't just another game machine, it was a revolution in living rooms across America. Unlike previous home systems that played only built-in games, the 2600 used interchangeable cartridges, creating an entirely new business model. Consumers could buy the console once and continue purchasing games indefinitely. The system launched with 9 games, including Combat, which became a pack-in title that showcased the system's capabilities. Within 2 years, Atari had sold over 1,000,2,600 units, despite the hefty price tag of $200, equivalent to nearly $1,000 today. The console's success was amplified by hit games like Space Invaders, which Atari licensed from the Japanese company Taito in 1980. Space Invaders was so popular that it actually drove console sales. People bought the entire system just to play that one game. By 1982, the 2600 had captured over 80% of the home console market, generating revenues that dwarfed even the most successful toy companies. But success bred complacency, and Atari's corporate culture began rotting from within. The company that once thrived on scrappy innovation transformed into a bureaucratic behemoth obsessed with quarterly profits over long-term vision. Key talent fled in droves, most notably the 4 programmers who founded Activision in 1979 after Atari refused to give game developers credit or royalties. This exodus wasn't just about money, it was about respect. Atari treated its programmers like interchangeable factory workers, refusing to put their names on games that generated millions in revenue. The company's arrogance extended to its treatment of retailers and consumers. When competitors like Intellivision and ColecoVision emerged with superior graphics and sound, Atari dismissed them as temporary threats, confident that brand loyalty would carry the day. Meanwhile, Warner Communications, which had purchased Atari from Bushnell for $28 million in 1976, pushed for ever-increasing profits without understanding the delicate ecosystem that made video games successful. The company that once moved fast and broke things now moved slowly and broke everything. The video game market in 1982 seemed unstoppable, generating over $3 billion in revenue and growing exponentially each quarter. Major corporations scrambled to enter the gold rush. Quaker Oats launched a video game division. Chase Manhattan Bank invested millions in game companies, and toy manufacturers abandoned traditional products to focus on electronic entertainment. The number of available game cartridges exploded from a few dozen in 1980 to over 400 by 1982. Retailers couldn't stock enough inventory to meet demand, and consumers seemed willing to buy anything with Atari compatible printed on the box. This apparent strength masked fundamental weaknesses that would soon bring down the entire industry. Quality control became non-existent as companies rushed products to market without testing. Store shelves filled with games that were broken, boring, or simply unfinished. The Atari 2600, now 5 years old, struggled to run increasingly complex games, leading to compromised experiences that frustrated consumers. Most critically, the market became oversaturated with companies that had no understanding of what made games fun, treating software as a commodity rather than entertainment. Into this volatile environment came two decisions that would destroy Atari and nearly kill the video game industry entirely. First, Warner Communications pushed Atari to acquire the rights to adapt Steven Spielberg's blockbuster film E.T. the Extraterrestrial into a video game. The licensing deal cost Atari an unprecedented $25 million, requiring the sale of over 4 million cartridges just to break even. This was corporate synergy at its worst. Executives who had never played a video game making decisions based on Hollywood logic rather than gaming realities. Second, and even more catastrophically, Atari gave programmer Howard Scott Warshaw just 5 weeks to create the E.T. game in time for the 1982 Christmas season. Warshaw was talented. He had created the acclaimed Raiders of the Lost Ark game for the 2600, but 5 weeks was an impossibly short timeline for any game, let alone one carrying such massive financial expectations. The company that once prided itself on innovation now prioritized marketing schedules over product quality, a decision that would prove fatal. The E.T. game that emerged from this impossible timeline was a disaster of epic proportions. Players controlled the alien as he searched for phone pieces to call his ship home, but the gameplay was confusing, repetitive, and virtually impossible to complete without consulting the manual. The graphics were primitive even by 1982 standards, and the game's most memorable feature was falling into pits randomly scattered throughout each screen. Players would spend most of their time falling into holes and slowly levitating out, only to immediately fall into another pit. There was no clear objective, no sense of progression, and no fun whatsoever. Critics savaged the game immediately, but Atari had already manufactured over 4 million cartridges and shipped them to retailers nationwide. The company spent millions more on television advertising, promising an adventure that would let players be good and help E.T. return home. Instead, consumers encountered a broken, incomprehensible mess that betrayed both the beloved film and their trust in the Atari brand. Returns flooded back from retailers within weeks of the December launch, but the damage was irreversible. E.T. became the symbol of everything wrong with the video game industry in 1982, but it was far from the only problem. Atari simultaneously released Pac-Man for the 2600, another highly anticipated adaptation that proved equally disappointing. The company manufactured 12 million Pac-Man cartridges despite only 10 million 2600 consoles existing at the time, displaying a fundamental misunderstanding of basic mathematics and market dynamics. The 2600 version of Pac-Man bore little resemblance to the arcade hit, featuring flickering graphics, simplified mazes, and gameplay that frustrated rather than entertained. Combined with E.T., these two failures represented over $50 million in losses and irreparably damaged Atari's reputation for quality. Consumers who had trusted the Atari brand for 5 years suddenly questioned every purchase, leading to a collapse in software sales across the entire industry. The company's stock price plummeted from $60 per share to $8 in less than 12 months, wiping out billions in market value and triggering panic throughout the gaming sector. The industry crash that followed was swift and merciless. By early 1983, major retailers like Sears, JCPenney, and Kmart were liquidating their video game inventories at massive discounts, flooding the market with products that nobody wanted. Toy stores that had devoted entire aisles to cartridges suddenly relegated games to clearance bins, replacing them with traditional toys and electronics. Console sales dropped by over 90% year over year, and software sales fell even more dramatically as consumers lost faith in digital entertainment entirely. Video games became synonymous with disappointment and waste, a fad that had run its course and left only regret in its wake. Atari, desperate to cut losses, actually buried thousands of unsold cartridges in a New Mexico landfill, including massive quantities of E.T. and Pac-Man. This wasn't an urban legend, it was a real burial that symbolized the death of American gaming supremacy. The company that had created the industry now presided over its funeral, having transformed from innovator to destroyer in less than a decade. Warner Communications, facing mounting losses and shareholder revolt, began dismantling Atari piece by piece. The home console division was sold to Commodore founder Jack Tramiel in 1984 for just $240 million, a fraction of the company's peak valuation. Tramiel attempted to revive the brand with new consoles like the Atari 7800 and later the Jaguar, but the damage was irreversible. Meanwhile, the arcade division was sold separately, eventually becoming part of Midway Games. The Atari name lived on through various ownership changes and licensing deals, but it was a hollow shell of its former glory. The company released its final console, the Jaguar, in 1993, marketing it as the first 64-bit gaming system. Despite superior technology, the Jaguar sold fewer than 250,000 units and was discontinued after just 3 years. Nintendo had already conquered America with the Nintendo Entertainment System, carefully rebuilding consumer confidence through strict quality control and innovative games. The video game industry recovered and eventually grew larger than ever, but Atari was no longer part of that success story. The fall of Atari serves as a masterclass in how corporate arrogance and short-term thinking can destroy even the most dominant market positions. The company that invented the video game industry lost it through a toxic combination of contempt for talent, obsession with quick profits, and fundamental misunderstanding of what made their products special. E.T. wasn't just a bad game. It was the inevitable result of treating creativity like manufacturing and consumers like idiots. Atari's story reminds us that no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to the consequences of forgetting what made it great in the first place. The company that taught the world to play ultimately forgot how to play itself, leaving behind only the bitter irony of its name, a warning that even kings can find themselves surrounded with no moves left to make.